Welcome everybody to the Diffit Educator Spotlight series. I'm Matt. I'm your community lead at Diffit for Teachers, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Stefany Palomba, who is one of our Diffit ambassadors and an educator, a science educator who uses Diffit in the classroom for all kinds of differentiation, awesome kinds of learning experiences for students that I'm really excited to kind of get into and hear more about today. But we'll jump right in, and Stefany, I will pass the mic to you because you can introduce yourself and share a little bit about who you are, your background, where you are, where you teach. And I always get really excited to hear teachers describe their communities, where you are, what your school is like, what your students are like.
Okay, thank you. I am a high school science teacher. I have about 3 decades in the classroom, and currently serve students in the alternative public school setting. And I want to say my path to teaching was rooted in the belief that education could change the course of life for some students and their course of opportunities. And over the years, working with students who need extra help, they need the work to be relevant, structured, and human. And that's deeply shaped me as an educator.
That's great. Thanks. I love that approach. It's interesting the way that, you go into teaching and you're thinking about a thing, and then you get into a classroom setting, and as you learn about your students, you learn more about yourself and about your craft and about what you care about. You describe the ways that you, at the core of who you are, is making teaching relevant. It's making teaching human, which I love that phrase so much. I wonder if you could give us a little bit more detail, a little bit more color to what this looks like in a great day. If you get home and you had a fantastic day of teaching and learning with your students, how do you know? What are the signals that say that felt really human? I connected with my students. I did my best work as a teacher.
Okay, well, a good day of learning consists of students that are doing mental work. And they're usually reading, discussing, writing, questioning, and making meaning of the assignment that's before them. And it's really important to see that cognitive engagement, and that does require the reading and writing and that literacy there for science.
Great. Okay, so let's dig into that. When you talk about literacy in science, I don't know if, I think literacy teachers and science teachers are well, yeah, of course. But maybe outside of those two disciplines, we don't always see those two words together. So talk to us a little bit more about what science literacy looks like.
Okay. Science literacy means helping students read, write, speak, and think. They're communicators in science. It looks like in the classroom, it looks like students reading informational text. They're looking at graphs, they're looking at tables, they're analyzing, they're interpreting evidence, using vocabulary in that context. And then they're explaining those scientific ideas clearly. That's literacy.
That's
All those
literacy, right? Yeah. And I'm an ELA teacher. That's my background. And so a lot of that rings true for me and there's even misconceptions within ELA around reading and writing, but there's also speaking and listening. There's interpreting, there's synthesis of ideas and whatnot. So you also talk about making this type of learning relevant for your students. And I haven't heard you talk yet about what I would consider kind of hard scientific topics and scientific standards and stuff like that. So maybe close up that circle and that gap for us and talk to me a little bit about how within literacy, you're building scientific practice, you're building scientific thinking and helping students do that cognitive work while keeping it relevant for your super unique group of really diverse students.
So many of our students need extra, I want to say extra pushes, extra time, extra showing students how to do things in the classroom. So when we're talking about literacy in science, some of our students need help learning how to start sentences. They need to know what words to use. Sometimes they'll use the word it, things, stuff. And students need to be more specific when they're talking about science and what we're doing in science. I notice they do struggle with complex text, and that's where we take annotation, we take claim evidence reasoning, and we try to give it a perspective where students are really learning and comprehending what they're learning. And we see that process in completed work as well as the quality of the completed work.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you have, I'm going to go off script a little bit just because I'm curious about this. Can you think of an example of a project where you felt really successful about the ways that you as a teacher taught some of those literacy, some of that vocabulary, those skills, and then a student produced something that was really relevant. It was really real world. It was clear to you that one, they had sort of gained the knowledge, practiced the skills, learned the vocabulary, and then were able to produce what we might define as a scientific product. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Do you have an example
Okay.
of that?
Yeah, I hope so. In my environmental science class, we started reading a trade book, and it's by Hope Jaren. And the book is called The Story of More. And it's really a concept about the overconsumption here that we have in the United States and some of the ways that the crops that we're growing, the bioengineering that's taking place, and all of those scientific concepts that our students aren't used to hearing about or even in the news or in their social media, and it exposes them to those words in real context. And I really like how the author talks about it in perspective of a real human being. She kind of follows her life through these specific decades in time and what has happened during those decades of time. And we can look at the ecology of it. We can also look at what's happening politically in regards to it. And we can also look at it, how it changes our global perspective, as well as atmosphere, as well as ozone and all of those things. So some of the ways that I get them engaged is before we start reading, I always try to generate some types of like anticipation questions. So I can anticipate, I can let them know this is what is coming, and they can answer some questions. And then that's sometimes where we build the relevance in. So something might be happening I can put something on like CNN 10 or something like that that's relevant and connect it to the book then as well. When we finish up a chapter, this is where we try to really work in the writing and where they can take those concepts and start writing and reading, going back into the text, finding it, and then being able to explain it and explain what it means. One of the cool activities that I do is in Hope's book, she has data, and the data is just data. There's no pictures, there's no graphs. It is just informational text. And one of the assignments is I have the students pick a set of data, and then they need to represent it to me. They need to show me what that means for them. So one of the activities was about the age. So like they had to compare it was actually the ages of mortality. And you could look at the time periods and see the differences between each of the decades, what our world population was. And so it was geared around the population concept, but they got to actually look at that informational text and bring it back into the classroom. And then they had a product so they could show us what they learned. And I did have to review a few of the, how to set up a table, how to do graphing, how to, demonstrate it to them. Hey, let's refresh your mind how to do those things. And I like the fact that they use a notebook. And so we do all of this in a notebook. So I can really see how they've grown before the book and then after the book.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So you have the sort of before, middle, end
Mhm.
visual of the learning journey, and they do too, right? And I can imagine that like metacognition of students have so few opportunities anymore to see their own growth. So it's valuable for you as a teacher, but hopefully also they're able to go back and be like, oh, I learned, I grew in this. Interesting. So I hear you describing what I would call like different modalities of interacting, so they're reading, they're writing, they're visualizing, they're synthesizing information in a variety of ways, which we know is super important for learners across content areas, but certainly in math, in science, to be able to interact with data, with information in a variety of ways. What are some other ways? Because you're in an alternative education high school. So you're differentiating daily and multiple times a day, and you've got students at various points of entry. So can you share some of the other ways that you are differentiating, what some of the tools and sort of patterns and frameworks you use to effectively meet students where they are and help them along that learning journey?
Absolutely. So let's go. A few of the things that I use are chunking. And that's something that every chunking, scaffolding, providing modeling responses, particularly when we're talking about writing sentences and how to write a thesis statement. I give the students demonstrations of what a good thesis statement looks like. That thesis statement will have the variables, your independent variable, your dependent variable, and it needs to basically give us something that is going to be measured. So students, there are different, I give students the beginning sometimes of the sentence if I see that they're struggling. And sometimes I give some students, more and some students less, depending on where they are in the curriculum and how much they understand about the reading and writing process. And you can usually tell where they are with the reading and writing process if you begin like each class maybe with a journal entry, and you can see who are the writers that need help and who are the writers that don't that don't need as much help, basically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so then I have to ask, we've talked about this a little bit before, but we're on for Diffit here. So I'm interested in how Diffit fits into some of this, because I know you've talked to me in the past about using Diffit as a tool to produce some of these packets. And I know that a lot of teachers prefer Diffit for printed work. And you've described the ways that like notebooks are really powerful for you in your instruction, being able to see and have students interact with printed versions of activities, as well as for the differentiation. And it sounds like that sort of in the moment, like noticing what students need and where they are, and then being able to adapt a resource could be and likely is really powerful for you. Talk to me a little bit about Diffit, but if there are any other tech tools that are really helpful for you at any point in that process, I'd love to hear about that too.
Excellent. So one of the ways that I've used Diffit in the classroom is I used it for the claim evidence and reasoning. There are literacy strategies on Diffit that are specific to reading and comprehension. And when I was using that book in the environmental science class, I was really excited because the information I put in, it spit back a few maps of the world,
Mm.
had it highlighted in different colors, showing us exactly what that data was talking about. And that's not something you see in other AI tools. You don't see those visual images, the concept mapping. Those are very helpful for the students. I've seen some process, like it's almost like Diffit just knows what we're looking for and what is the most important things in the classroom, particularly. And so,
Almost.
yeah, there's like a think and where students have to, discuss topics as well. And usually they're really well thought out questions. I'm not getting just generic questions.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things. I talk to people about that in Diffit all the time, is like I call it critical creativity, this mix of like, the creativity of coming up with a discussion prompt or an activity or an idea, paired with the criticality of knowing what's going to be beneficial and valuable for students. And so you're describing like Diffit can identify, and I laughed a little bit when you said it's almost like, because it's exactly what it's built for, is to be able to identify what students need in the moment. And so you're sharing that you're reading a text with them and it's got a lot of really interesting and relevant information, but the thing that might be missing are these visuals. And so you can easily produce visual supports to help students both read the book and look at the visuals and then sort of synthesize. And then it's going to challenge them to think really critically about what they're reading and what they're seeing, and be able to produce and make connections. So that's fantastic. I think that's an interesting way. And especially in like a science setting, a lot of teachers may not be as familiar with Diffit for science, and the fact that it can create those visuals, it can create diagrams and charts, and it can intake data. I know you've uploaded passages from this book into Diffit and then got those charts and the data in formatted in different ways, and then different ways that students are interacting with those activities. So cool. Very cool. I wonder if we could kind of close up with, I'll give you options. I'll give you two options here, because we love choice, voice and choice here. So I wonder if you have like one more story that was energizing for you, where you knew that you like met students where they are and you saw them on this learning journey and it felt really encouraging and inspiring, like you had really done your job as an educator. Or I would say the sort of flip of that is like, do you have some quick pieces of advice? Like I love asking people for their if someone is watching this and feeling like, I want to teach like Stefany someday, like this is really exciting to me, what are some steps that they can take tomorrow, to integrate some more of this creative instruction, this student-centered, multimodal teaching and learning into?
I would say the first thing is to not let AI take over your classroom. Everything needs to be thought out. The pedagogy, the art of teaching, that just can't go away from what we're doing in the classroom. And we still need to start with those standards. And from there, we can design assignments, work, activities for the student in specific contents. So it's just one of those things where we need to keep teaching as the main goal. So even though we learn AI tools and everybody's excited about the AI tools, we still have to function where we're coming from the perspective of our standards and not just using AI to use AI and to generate questions or something. Like it still needs to have some consistency, as well as students still need to be able to think cognitively. I had a teacher who was complaining to me that all of the teachers, it's called you AI'd it. They AI'd because they knew the response obviously was a little bit more mature than they usually receive. And so then my question was, if they used AI, what's the difference between using AI and just reading that one passage where you're trying to find the answer for that information? So meaning if you already have the answers in front of you,
Yeah.
all you have to do now is read it. If you're using AI to solve the problem, you still have to type in that question. There is still a kinesthetic connection between your brain and the question. And so when you still have to look for an answer, but now you're just using a different tool to find your answer. It's not the same, So, I mean, we can all look at it like that if we want. But I really think that we need to think about changing how we're teaching if we're just thinking students are learning from multiple choice, because that's just not what's happening.
Yeah, I think, and we've heard that, right, all along in conversations about assessment, in conversations about like project-based learning and hands-on learning, and this idea that like, well, if ultimately, for me, it comes down to like, if it's possible to cheat, it's not a great assessment. It's not a great learning experience. If they can just AI the answer or look up the multiple choice response, like, what else are we doing? And I hear you saying that in the work that you do with students and identifying where they are and what they need, in ensuring that you're making content relevant, pulling in a trade book into the science classroom and using something that is relatively new. And so they can't look up that much information about it online, and they have to do some of the thinking or the translating information into visuals and really challenging them to get involved with the content. It sounds like your classroom is a wonderful place and a place where they're learning a ton. I'm sure they would all agree with me. But thank you for sharing a little bit of that with us. Thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for being here. And keep it up. I hope the rest of the year goes well for you. And I appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity.